If I was to pick a video of how not to fight a tank, this video would be it. This is a tank out of control. The Russians have lost 4,382 tanks. I'm not at all surprised. My name's Colonel Hamish to Bretton-Gordon. I've been a tank commander for 24 years. I've commanded tanks at troop level, which is 3 tanks, squadron level, 14 tanks, and regimental level, up to 50 tanks across various different theatres of operations. What we're going to look at now is some Russian tank drills that we've observed in the Ukraine war and trying to bring out what they are doing and really why they are performing so badly because of the way that they are trying to fight their tanks. This first clip we're seeing appears to be a troop of tanks, probably 3 tanks, possibly T-72s, with a platoon of armoured fighting vehicles, BMPs or BRDMs. I think the first thing to note here is they're moving in complete daylight. So very easy to pick up from the Ukrainian drone that's looking at them. They're very bunched. Look how close together they are. They're not, they're almost tethered, but they probably are because the lead tank, the troop leader, is probably the only person with a map and knows where they are. So as we're seeing now, they're very easy pickings. They're being hit by probably javelin missiles. These are launched from the ground, possibly some sort of smart artillery weapon. But they're so open. I mean, look at all the woods around. If they were in the woods, they'd be much harder to acquire. Now, several of them being hit and destroyed. We can see one tank over to the left-hand side trying desperately to get out of the way. This is the sort of maneuver that they should have been doing in this open ground to try and avoid being hit. Because, for a number of drones that have been following them and probably following them for some time, this is easy targetry here. Absolutely no difficulty. And following up there, look as though a bit of cluster munitions fired to get the infantry as they debus from their vehicles. The key point, or the first major point we see in the first clip, is how bunched the tanks and the infantry fighting vehicles are. Now, if they're very close together, as they've seen, any drone looking at them or any other tank looking at them will see them all in one picture as we're seeing them. When you're in a tank and you're firing at enemy tanks, once you've fired at one tank, you generally have to move the turret completely to look at the next one. But if they're all in your sight picture, and when I look through my tank sight, I can see about 100, 150 meters laterally without having to move it. So in this clip, I could see virtually all those tanks. And certainly the way a Challenger 2 works is I put the firing dot, as it were, on one tank, press 2 buttons, and the computer works out all the mathematics, and then the gun automatically fires. As soon as the loader has reloaded the gun, it then fires on the next one, next one, next one. So that's why bunching, they should be at least 150 meters apart. But because they probably have very little training and don't know where they're going, that's why the tendency to come together and completely unaware of drones. Now, the drone is following them, very accurately, and that is going directly back to the tank commander and to the infantry guys who are looking at them, who will fire the missiles to destroy them. What we're seeing here is another armoured vehicle operating in complete daylight and being very, very obvious what they're doing. They're moving around a woodland. They're pictures of Ukrainian drones presumably taking out some vehicles, and we see some damaged vehicles. Again, these vehicles are all using the roads, not using the cover of the woods. I mean, it's absolutely incongruous. And tanks break down or are damaged. And the main part of this piece is trying to recover a vehicle. But again, one sees how clear it is in day. You should be doing this at night when people can't see you so easily, because a tank towing a tank is even an easier target, and it's on a main road. I mean, there is so much ground around and cover around that they could be using, but of course they're not. They're making a heck of a noise. Again, these tanks are completely uncamouflaged and providing a really, really easy target. The operations that we're seeing by the Russian tank crews are completely amateurish. I assume that the people crewing these tanks have absolutely no training and virtually no experience. They are making every mistake in the book, operating in daylight, operating exactly where the Ukrainians would expect them to do. In warfare, you need to try and get into your enemy's mind. What is the enemy going to do? And when I look at this, I don't even have to bother about getting into the Russian mind. I know exactly what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And when we hear, I think only at the beginning of this week, that the Russians have lost 4,382 tanks in this conflict thus far, I'm not at all surprised, because they are just presenting themselves as very easy targets. Certainly one of those tanks there looks to me to be a really ancient tank. So this is probably a sign of desperation. They have been told, at all counts, try and recover tanks because we're just running out of them. But actually, the way they're doing it is a suicide mission, and they're just going to lose more and more tanks. This clip we're seeing here is completely incongruous. You've got a tank moving around, and with its main armament, its gun, actually bashing into an infantry vehicle and knocking all the soldiers off. Now, this is a tank out of control. Obviously, the driver and the commander have absolutely no idea what they're doing. They're all grouped together very closely. Now, I understand this video is about 6 months old. What is bizarre is that the Russian tank crews seem to have learned nothing. The more recent videos we've seen have showed tank crews operating just as ineptly. So they're learning nothing, but, bashing other people with your barrel. There are two things here. I mean, first of all, it's very unprofessional. And secondly, you bash that barrel and it won't be, they're going to have to replace it. They're going to have to take it off. It would not fire straight. And actually, if they did put a round down, it could explode. So an unbelievable lack of professionalism on show. It's incredibly disorientating when you first get in a tank. If you think that actually the tank hull moves in one direction, the turret can then move in another direction. And actually within the turret, you also have a sight. So there is potential for the person looking in the sight to be moving in three different directions. It's something, I was in a Scottish Royal Tank Regiment, and it's something we described as disco head. You get so confused because these things are moving in different ways that sometimes, certainly when you're inexperienced, you don't know which way is up and which way you're going. So in this particular case, it is very poorly trained tank crews, I expect, who've got completely disorientated, don't know where they're going, don't know what to say. It's in the very early days when you learn how to get in and operate a tank, these sort of things happen. But it's something that with experience, you learn how to operate effectively with. The other thing that this clip shows is, quite how desperate the Russians are getting. I mean, you can train a soldier to fire a rifle and put them in the trench in a couple of days, which is what the Russians are doing. But you can't do that with a tank. They're, just firing the gun takes a lot of training, and it's not firing the gun. As we've seen on these clips, it's actually moving around. And if you get lost or disorientated, you're next to useless. In fact, you're a liability, as we've seen here. This is not something you can pick up. You need at least 6 months training, ideally a year, to be effective in a single tank. You just can't jump in it and fight it, because, as we've seen, you're more danger to your own troops than you are the enemy. There's more evidence of tanks being in the open, on a main road, sticking out. And as we've seen a number of times in this conflict, the drone has dropped a grenade or some sort of incendiary device right down the open turret of a tank. This is happening, on a regular basis to Russian tanks in the Ukraine, and they're doing nothing about it. I mean, it is quite bizarre. I mean, there are ways around it, and I'm not going to detail them, but the fact that so many have been brewed up, and what happens is once a grenade gets in there, it then detonates, and as we're seeing now, the ammunition, which is highly explosive, then blows up and burns, and the tank is destroyed. At a similar time, other vehicles around are being attacked. But what you see is how obvious it is, how easy it is to see it. And those people in there, again, are perish. But a tank is a highly valuable piece of equipment on the battlefield, but it has to be used appropriately. Otherwise, it is a liability. And the fact that it's, a $5 million tank is taken out by a $200 grenade is quite extraordinary. But those tank crew are obviously completely unaware of the drones surrounding them and looking at them every minute of the daylight. What they aren't aware of is camouflage and stealth. And all the pictures, all the videos we've seen of tanks, they really stick out like a sore thumb. And that's because they're not using the ground, they're not using camouflage. The most recent one we've seen with a drone dropping a grenade through the turret, had it moved to the left and got in the woodland, it would be much more difficult to see, and probably the branches of the trees would have affected the grenade. So, number one, the Russians are unaware of the effect of drones, but they're using themselves. So that to me really says that there is not many lessons being learned by the Russians. They're not sharing information, but fundamentally, their skills and drills, their field craft, as we call it, is completely rubbish. They are not in any way, or don't appear to be in any way, trained or have a desire to try and hide themselves. They're almost saying, come and hit us. But I expect it's not those. It's not the fault of the individual tank crews, probably because they're just so inexperienced. They've had so little training, and that makes them sitting ducks. And they haven't improved over the whole conflict, so they're not learning from their mistakes, which is why I'm confident that the end of the Russian military is not too far over the horizon in Ukraine.